Chapter 13. Near a brown dwarf star on the edge of the Coronach cluster, the New Republic astrographic probe Astrolabe dropped out of hyperspace. The broad, flat underside of the small, unarmed ship was heavily studded with scanners. 4 scan platforms carried everything from stereo imagers and neutron dippers to quark detectors and wide-band photometricons. Many of the instruments were duplicated as a hedge against malfunctions. The combination of the thin, wide profile and the scanner configuration had given the Astrogator-class probes the nickname Flatfish, which in turn had given rise to an unofficial logo popular with the crews. "Your tour operators, the Astrographic Survey Institute, welcome you to Dornick 1142, the pilot called back to his survey team. "Be sure to take in all the recreational opportunities of this undiscovered gem of Farlax sector. Look out the viewports. Then later you can look out the viewports. And whatever else you do during your 19-hour stay, make sure you take the time to look out the viewports." It was an old familiar joke and drew no more than ritual chuckles from the survey team. ASI vessels were the restless, peripatetic travelers of the stars, professional tourists on breathless sightseeing expeditions through the galaxy. Capable of exceptionally high speeds in real space, a Flatfish rarely took more than a day to complete a mapping and survey pass across the top of an entire star system. Most planets were overflown at close to maximum speed. Only if the approach data showed signs of life would a probe slow to quarter speed. Only the markers of technological habitation could make them linger as long as a single orbit. Only the most extraordinary anomalies in the scans could make a Flatfish pilot turn back and make a second pass, and landings were so rare as to be nearly unheard of. Astrolabe had been diverted from work in Toranic sector to fill a gap in the standard star charts, a gap left by the Fallen Empire's obsessive secrecy, which treated ordinary astrographic data about the territory it controlled as classified military data. The pilot, an 18-year veteran known to his crew as Gabby, had overflown more than 1,000 planets in his career, but had set foot on only 3. His senior surveyor, Tania, had nearly 3,000 overflights on her jacket, yet had ground-level memories of only half a dozen. The junior surveyor, Rolf, expected to pass the 500 mark on this tour, but had never drawn a breath on any world but his homeworld. This mission began like all the others. The first hour was the busiest. While Tania and Rolf checked out the scanners, Gabby calibrated the probe's autonav for the shortest path mapping pass over the system's quartet of cold, gaseous planets. They had every reason to think that their visit to Dornick 1142 would be short and uneventful, ending with a compressed data dump to Coruscant and the jump to the next gravitational well. But it would end early and hard. Gabby and Tania were playing a word game over the ship's comm system as Astrolabe approached the second planet. "Hemostat," said Gabby. "Oh, easy. Statistics." Experience." Tania laughed. "That's not legal, but I'm going to give it to you anyway because I'm such a kind and loving soul." "Encephalitis." "Tissue." Tania frowned. "I take it back. I think you've got me now." Without warning, the ship began to shake violently. The cabin was filled with a roaring sound like an animal wind, a deep, growly rumble, and crackling like fire. "What the hell?" Rolf exclaimed. "Something's wrong with the engines," Gabby cried as the roar became a screaming whistle. In the next moment, the air was ripped from his lungs in a frosty plume, and silence reigned. Moments later, with the temperature plunging, the cabin lights failed. The trouble board, now a mass of blinking red and yellow squares, provided the only illumination. In the last excruciating seconds of consciousness, with the gases boiling in his blood vessels, the pilot tried to reach the switches to manually fire the emergency buoy and transmit the log, but his limbs, bound up by agony, would not obey him. He was already dead, and consciousness soon gratefully followed volition into the abyss. Vol-Nur, primate of the battlecruiser Purity, watched approvingly as a fierce salvo of high-energy laser pulses blindsided the intruding vessel. The accuracy and discipline of his gun crews pleased him, and he made a note to commend the weapons master. The firing ceased with the vessel holed and ravaged, but not destroyed. A cloud of white fire and metal dust would have had little to tell them, but there would be wreckage enough to examine, and Vol-Nur's follow-up report could be as complete and useful as possible.
"Send out the salvors," he ordered. "Make certain they maintain hygienic protocols on all material recovered."
Then Vol-Nur locked himself in the secure communications booth. A few minutes later, he transmitted what would be the only alert concerning the destruction of the astrolabe to be sent from Dornick 1142. A short burst of code aimed not at the Astrographic Survey Institute on Coruscant, but at the Viceroy's flagship, Armada, ground moored at Imperial City's Eastport.
"3 days in a row now," Princess Leia said to those gathered in the staff conference room. "Does anyone have any hint why Nilspar's been canceling our sessions? Is he ill? Do we know anything about what he's been doing?"
"He's only left the ship once," said General Carlist Raikin. "He went to the diplomatic hostel and stayed 2 hours and 13 minutes.
"Never mind that. Who did he go there to see?"
asked Akbar. "We weren't able to develop that information," Raikin admitted. "You know what the hostel is like. Hot and cold running privacy. The diplomatic missions expect that. I can tell you that the hostel host has been keeping a chalet reserved for the Yavitha since before they arrived, and this is the first time any of them have turned up there."
"So he could have met with any or all of the legates staying at the hostel," said Leia.
"That's correct."
"I want to see a list," Akbar demanded.
"We've prepared one and transmitted it to everyone on the clearance sheet for this meeting," said Raikin. "I do have some additional information, which was given to me just before I left the office to come over here. The Viceroy received visitors today on board the Armada."
"What?"
exclaimed Nanao Deng.
"They haven't allowed anyone but their own past the portal since that ship arrived. Who was it?"
"Senator Paramus, Senator Hudidiji, and Senator Maruk," said Raikin. "They arrived together and all stayed more than 2 hours. Senator Maruk left before the others."
"Do we know if they were invited, or they invited themselves?" asked Leia.
"I made a discreet inquiry to Senator Maruk's staff. It seems they were invited."
"Have they been in contact with the Yavitha all along?"
"Princess Organa, I can't answer that."
"Let's get them all in here, and we'll get some answers,"
Admiral Akbar said testily. "Let Senator Paramus answer."
"Easy, my friend. Let's try to keep this in perspective," said Leia. "The Viceroy has every right to meet with whomever he chooses. He doesn't need our permission to hold a tea party."
"Princess, forgive me. If you were not ready to hear the answers, why did you ask the question?"
Leia turned to Raikin and frowned. "What are you talking about?"
"You asked if anyone had any notion why the Viceroy was canceling his sessions with you. Now you learn that he's met privately with some of the candidate legations and publicly with some of the Senate's most iconoclastic members. He's not only broken all precedent, but pointedly extended courtesies to others that he's never extended to you, and you refuse to draw the obvious conclusion."
"Which is?"
"That something fundamental has changed, that your negotiations with Nilspar are over."
But what could have caused the change? Leia protested. There were no problems at our last meeting. I can't believe that he would throw all our work away without so much as a word.
Admiral Akbar, who was standing, was the first to notice the view panes of the conference room beginning to hum. The broad expanse of transparent steel had been darkened against the morning sun and prying eyes, so he could not immediately see the cause of the tremor when he turned.
"Princess, a moment. What is it?"
"I know that sound," Aang was saying. "Something big over at Eastport," Raiken said. "Can't you hear it?" By that time, Akbar had strode to the controls for the viewpanes, and the room was abruptly flooded with light. As one, they turned their faces toward it and squinted into the glare. They saw the bright spherical shape of Aramadia slowly ascending from the spaceport, with its 3 tiny escorts circling it like planets around a star. Ripples of atmospheric distortion rolled out of scalloped depressions in its hull. "I guess we'll have to believe it now," said Aang. "I have the port commander online," Raiken said.
"Let all of us hear it," said Leia.
"Yes, sir. Go ahead, Commander. What's happening out there?" The roar of the Yavithan vessel's pulse lifters was louder over the comm line than it was in the conference room.
"We're still sorting things out. I can tell you Aramadia did not request a launch window from the tower. Our first warning she was going to lift was when she started to launch escorts. That wasn't enough warning to get everyone clear of the downblast. There are 6 port sentries and at least 3 ground personnel injured, and the ship in the nearest bay, Mother's Valkyrie, looks like it took some substantial damage. Those pulse lifters are nasty. We've got reports of ships being bounced as far away as the commuter docks."
"Thank you, Commander. Stand by," Raiken said, and closed the link. "Princess, I recommend we immediately place the home fleet on high alert."
"We must do more than that," said Akbar. "I have ordered the Brilliant to move into position to fire on the Aramadia if necessary." "What? Why would that be necessary?"
"Princess, Aramadia is inside our planetary shield," said Raiken. "A ship that size could carry enough munitions to make quite a mess down here, at least the equivalent of a couple of Imperial assault frigates. We can't wait until we know what she means to do to respond."
"This is insane," Leia protested. "It's a diplomatic vessel. We have no evidence that it's even armed. Why would Nilspar do such a thing?"
She looked back over her shoulder at Alo.
"Any response?"
Her aide shook her head.
"No, sir. No answer at all to your earlier messages or to my red line page." "Princess," Akbar said, "with respect, the question we need to be asking right now is not why he might do it, but what we can do to prevent it. We can't afford the luxury of thinking we have friends on that ship."
"I agree," said Raiken. "The casualties at Eastport testify to Nilspar's priorities. They had to know what the consequences of a full power lift with no advance warning would be. They've demonstrated that their convenience was more important to them than the lives of our people on the ground."
"Not convenience," Akbar said. "This was no coincidence. This was calculated. He must have known that we were meeting. This was meant to embarrass you, just like the invitation to the senators." "No, I can't believe that," said Leia, but her face wore a defeated expression. "Nevertheless," she sighed, "alert the fleet and the ground defenses. Instruct the captain of the Brilliant to take up position and stand by for further orders, but we will not be the first to fire. I want that understood by everyone. This has to be a misunderstanding. Let's not do anything to make it worse."
Aramadia went into orbit 40 clicks below the lower limit of Coruscant's planetary shield, with Brilliant shadowing it astern. There it remained for the next 2 hours, as mute and inscrutable as ever. In General Raiken's words, "running the yard like a dog who knows exactly where the fence is." Akbar and Leia watched the orbital traces of both ships on a monitor in her office, with Leia growing more and more impatient.
"What is he waiting for?"
she demanded of no one in particular, pacing the room.
He was in such a hurry to raise ship, and now he just sits there. It doesn't make any sense. If he's planning to leave, he'll have to ask for clearance to transit the shield, won't he?"
"So far as we know," said Akbar, "it's not possible to jump through or over our planetary shield."
"That's what I thought. But if he has something else in mind, he's squandered his moment of surprise and then some. So what could this be about?"
"Maybe he's giving us a chance to apologize."
"Apologize? For what? Am I supposed to guess? It's hard enough dealing with all the ones who won't say what they mean, or tell you what they think you want to hear. What am I supposed to do when they won't talk at all? They come here and expect me to dance at their protocol ball without ever showing me the steps."
As she spoke, Akbar recoiled at the bitterness of her words and the harshness of her tone. Belatedly, Leia noticed his reaction.
"I'm sorry," she said, and sighed deeply. "It isn't you. I just don't understand why this is happening, and it's making me a little crazy."
"Princess," said Akbar, "that may be exactly why it's happening." At the rostrum of the huge Senate chamber, Ben Kilnam gavelled the body into order. He wondered at the unusual number of senators present for the opening, more than half the number seated, if his eyes did not deceive him. There had been much talk in the corridor and the cloakrooms about the sudden departure of the Yavitha that morning, but that could not account for the turnout. The first hour or more of each daily session was usually lost to self-serving speeches intended more for the homeworlds than for the senators' peers. It was common to find the chamber empty, except for those waiting to speak. Ben Kilnam glanced at the list and could find no name that could explain the high attendance or the speed with which the senators were moving to their seats. "There's something here," he thought worriedly. "The chair recognizes Senator Hadidiji."
"I rise to speak on a point of privilege."
"Senator Hadidiji is recognized on a point of personal privilege." Hadidiji rose at his seat and addressed the rostrum without benefit of the microphone available to him, his voice booming out across the rows of planetary representatives. "Chairman, a matter of substantial urgency has arisen since I first requested my time. Due to the seriousness of this matter, I elect to yield my time to Senator Paramus of Walala, and I ask that this body attend carefully to his presentation." There was a stir in the chamber, but less of one than Ben Kilnam would have expected. Apparently Paramus was the reason for the turnout, just as apparently Ben Kilnam had not heard all of the morning's gossip and rumors, a prospect that brought a frown to his face. "Senator Paramus," he said with a nod, then stepped back from the podium. "Thank you, Chairman, and I thank Senator Hadidiji for his indulgence," said Paramus. "Most of you know by now that the Yavithan consular ship Aramadia made an unscheduled liftoff from Eastport this morning. I have been informed that 3 port employees are dead and more than a score injured." This time the stir had an angry edge to it. Ben Kilnam reached out and dragged an aide closer by means of a fistful of fabric. "Call the princess," he whispered harshly. "Tell her she'd better get herself down here now and bring her fire suit." 3 ships were also damaged, including a consular ship belonging to the autonomous territory of Pakwapuri. However, it's not the collapse of negotiations with the Yavitha, or the damage to property, or even the loss of life which should make this a matter of great import to us," said Paramus. "It is the reason why these things happened which must concern us. So far, there's been no information forthcoming from the President's office about these events. Not a word of explanation, or regret, or indignation. The princess has been unavailable, and there's been only silence from her staff. I'm not surprised by that. When you've heard what you're about to hear, you won't be surprised either. There isn't much they can say without lying, because the truth shames them." Senator Talik Yar shot to his feet. "A point of privilege is not a license to slander and defame, sir." "Chairman, I ask for order in the chamber." Paramus said, not even looking in Senator Yar's direction. The chamber will be in order, Ben Kilnam said without enthusiasm.
I warn you, recant your words before you flirt with treason.
Paramus shot the round-bodied Ulid a look of contempt. Sit down and listen, Senator, and you will learn something about treason, and about this woman you call your friend. Chairman, I ask that the Senate recorder activate the chamber's display screens and set them to channel 81, the diplomatic frequency. For what purpose, Senator? For the purpose of allowing Viceroy Nil Spar of the Yavitha to address this body from aboard Aramadia, which is presently orbiting Coruscant. Ben Kilnam turned away from the podium just long enough to send a second aide on a hasty mission. This is most irregular, Senator Paramus. So are the events in dispute, Chairman, and I consider the information the Viceroy can provide this body not merely relevant, but essential to understanding those events. Am I to understand that you already have knowledge of what the Viceroy will say? I was contacted by the Viceroy, and asked if I would help bring the truth to light. When I learned what the truth was, it seemed unlikely to me that we would hear it from any other source, and I agreed. There was a growing restlessness in the chamber.
Let's hear what the Viceroy has to say,
cried a voice from the high rows.
It's a point of privilege. He can introduce whatever he likes,
shouted another.
If you don't want to hear it, leave.
Senator Norm made us look at recordings of her last brood birth, and you allowed that irregularity. There was a ripple of laughter at that reminder, though Senator Norm glared unhappily.
Turn 'em on,
someone called, and it became a chorus. Turn 'em on, let's hear from the Viceroy. Ben Kilnam pounded his gavel. The chamber will be in order. Sergeant, you are to eject the next member I identify who speaks out of turn. There will be order, or I will suspend this session. The sergeant-at-arms, a hulking Gamorrean, moved forward from his usual post to the center of the well, from which he glowered up at the front benches. With Ben Kilnam alternately pounding the gavel and pointing it at the worst offenders, the chamber slowly settled into something resembling civility. That's better, Ben Kilnam said scoldingly. Remember who you are. This is the Senate of the New Republic. We are not a rabble. He peered down to his left. Senator Paramus.
Yes, Chairman.
Do you accept responsibility for your speaker's remarks as though they were your own, including any and all sanctions which would fall on any member of this body for transgressions against the Senate's code of conduct?
I do.
Then proceed with your presentation. When Ben Kilnam's first warning reached Princess Leia in her office, she headed not for the door, but for the darkened display on which she was able to monitor the Senator's hypercom feed on Channel 11.
I'm not rushing down there to put out a fire until I know what's burning, she told Akbar.
Moments later, they were joined by First Administrator Eng, who had been routinely monitoring the Senate on his own and came running to alert Leia.
Did you hear him? No information forthcoming.
Eng raged.
The situation's still developing. What is there to say? Aramadia is still sitting up there ignoring us. Bless Talik Yar anyway. Paramus hasn't even called here. He didn't try to get our side of it. Shh,
Leia said.
I can't hear what he's saying.
They did not have to watch long for Leia to conclude there was little she could accomplish by going to the Senate chamber.
They know me, she said. They know him. Let him make whatever intimations he wants. The Senate won't rush to judgment. I'll get my turn to be heard, but not today, in a shouting match with Paramus. He can have the floor to himself this morning.
But when Paramus announced his intention to have Nil Spar address the Senate, Akbar became livid.
This is absurd. Benny can't let Paramus do that. He can't stop him, Leia said. He has to allow it.
The Tuscan League is not a member of the Republic, Akbar said. Nil Spar has no right to use the diplomatic channels.
A technicality, said Leia. The chairman doesn't dare hold such a feeble reed up in the wind that's blowing down there. If the Viceroy addresses the Senate on Channel 81, it's going to go out on the repeaters to every New Republic homeworld, Eng said. Let me call someone I know over at Network Operations. He'd be willing to stop this from going off-planet on my word. No, said Leia. I'm not afraid of what he might say. Besides, the news grids are sure to have it by now. No, if the Viceroy won't speak to me, let him speak to whomever he wants. At least we'll find out what this is all about.
Then proceed with your presentation, Ben Kilnam was saying.
I told you he'd have to allow it, said Leia. Quiet, both of you, until he's done. I don't want to miss any of this.
Both the Coruscant Global News Grid and the independent New Republic Prime News Grid, tipped off by staffers from the offices of Senators Hadidiji and Paramus, had been following the contretemps in the Senate since Paramus had taken the floor. Port officials hadn't released any of the images captured by the official visual logs, but Global had an amateur recording of the liftoff of Aramadia made by a Bolovian envoy who was seeing family off at the Eastport terminal. That such a recording existed was almost inevitable, given how many lenses had been pointed in the direction of the Yavithan consular ship since its arrival. But it was just chance that the first moments of the recording included a blurry glimpse of one of the sentries being tumbled along the ground by the downblast like a rag doll. Prime's recording of the liftoff had been made from much farther away, by a space hobbyist who kept a bank of automated recorders on the balcony of his dormitory, and included no such graphic detail. But Prime had somehow gotten close-ups of the damage on the ground, including shots of bodies draped in death robes lying on the ground and being loaded onto emergency speeders. Nil Spar studied both the Global and Prime broadcasts intently as he awaited the outcome of the wrangling between the two vermin. As had been the case ever since the Yavitha mission had begun, what he saw on the grids was instructive. He had been obliged to learn how to think like the vermin in order to exploit their weaknesses, and the grids had brought him all the lessons and opportunities he could have asked for. But the Viceroy could still hardly believe the mad absurdities he had witnessed, not least of all the scene playing out before him. The idea that the vermin were allowed to speak against their supreme leader without fear that they would be slain on the spot and their blood used to drown their children, the idea that an anointed body of elders would even listen to an outsider, much less give credence to an outsider's insults. These were notions no Yavitha could easily accept. If Nil Spar had not seen for himself the weak hand that now ruled over the vermin, he could not have credited such reports. The body and the spirit of the vermin were fatally polluted by impurities of blood and honor. Their thousands of species had the same quality of unity as a handful of pebbles, each still separate, and its separate identity preventing it from merging into a greater whole. The vermin were contentiously divided, selfishly predatory, foolishly trusting, relentlessly irrational, fatally idealistic. Not a one of them had earned his respect, and none had earned more of his contempt than Tig Paramus, the traitor whose face now filled both displays. "I do," Paramus was saying.
"They will kill you slowly when they learn what you have done," thought Nil Spar, "and you will well deserve it."
"Then proceed with your presentation," said Ben Kilnam.
A signal light appeared before Nil Spar, and he muted the grid displays.
"Yes, Senator," he said. "I am here."
His long fingers steepled with gentle precision, Hiram Drayson leaned back in his chair and watched as the face on the Senate monitor changed from that of Tig Paramus to that of Nil Spar. Drayson had hoped for, though not expected, a glimpse inside the Aramadia. But the Yavitha had avoided that bit of carelessness. Wherever Nil Spar was transmitting from, the space behind him appeared as empty and unenlightening as a blank bulkhead. Given the universal propensity of starship designers to fill every available space, Drayson suspected the use of a screen, either physical or electronic.
Before I begin, I want to share my deep regret over the unfortunate casualties resulting from our ascent from Eastport,
the Viceroy said.
It was with great sorrow that I learned that our warnings had not been honored, and the thrust radius of the Armada had not been cleared. We had no thought or intention of injuring anyone. We left Eastport to avoid a confrontation, not to cause one.
Oh, very good, Drayson said to himself, nodding. Well done.
I regret the casualties, Nils Spar went on, but I cannot take responsibility for them. For more than 3 days we requested clearance to leave Coruscant. 3 members of your Senate witnessed 2 such attempts, and can testify that we received only silence in reply. We warned the Tower at Eastport and the President that we would raise ship without clearance if they left us no other choice. Their only response was to surround our ship with more soldiers and replace the ground crews with agents of the intelligence service.
Ah, Jason thought. Very interesting. Now, is it that you think they'll believe any accusation against the service, or do you have an honest card to play to help sell the lies? Allowing his fingers to lace together, Jason rocked slowly in his chair as he listened for the answer. Stars on fire, Aang breathed. Is it possible that any of this is true? Could there have been some sort of misunderstanding, and we didn't hear them asking for clearance? Shut up, Leia said. Nearly every seat in the Senate chamber was full now. Those not occupied by their owners had been commandeered by curious interlopers. Dozens more staffers lingered in the aisles, along the back wall, and in the open areas near the entrance doors. The 6-meter-tall image of Nils Spar on the display boards commanded their attention more powerfully than anyone at the podium or in the well was accustomed to.
It became clear that the government of Leia Organa intended to hold us here against our will, Nils Spar said. It became clear to me that we could not wait any longer. We risked losing not only the right of free navigation we had been promised, but the capacity to exercise it. Our Armada is a consular ship. It is ill-equipped to repel an armed assault. I am sure that those of you who think you know Princess Leia Organa may doubt that she is capable of ordering soldiers to attack diplomats. After spending so many hours with her, I thought I knew her, and I would have trouble believing it if there were not other evidence of her bad faith.
The screen flickered, and Nils Spar's face was replaced by images of burned and twisted metal laid out on bronze decking.
What you see now is the wreckage of a New Republic spy ship which violated the territorial hegemony of the Duscan League 4 days ago. It self-destructed when spotted by a local patrol vessel, but we were able to recover enough of it to identify its purpose and origin.
At that moment, the audience in the Senate, in offices all over Imperial City and on worlds throughout the New Republic, saw Yavithan hands turn over a large fragment to reveal a recognizable portion of the New Republic seal, the blue crest, the ring of stars, and the gold circle. Drayson leaned forward, staring, then slowly rose to his feet. Bloody bilge! That's no prowler. That's a flatfish, or used to be. He stabbed at his communication computer with a finger. Verify. Verified. Jason Hiram. Call Kyles Latot. Scramble. Calling Kyles Latot. Waiting. Verifying. Ready. Kyles, this is Jason.
Is that one of your ships being splashed all over the grids by the Yavithan ambassador?"
The associate director's voice was shaky. "Yes, we think so. It could be the astrolabe. She's 4 hours overdue for her logout from Dornick 1142.
4 hours? The viceroy said this happened 4 days ago. How is it you didn't know you'd lost a bird?"
"Admiral, you know there's not usually much traffic while they're in system. Look what he's saying. It's not true. Astrolabe wasn't on a spy mission. This was routine survey work."
"I didn't ask," said Jason, "but others will. Better work on your answers."
Princess Leia's face paled when 3 red body bags appeared briefly on the monitor.
"I regret to report that there were no survivors," Nilspar was saying. "We were able to recover 3 bodies, which we are prepared to make arrangements to return."
The viceroy's face reappeared.
"But we cannot, and will not, negotiate this or any other matter with President, Princess Leia Organa Solo. Everything she has said to us has been revealed by her actions as a lie. She claims to negotiate in good faith while she sends spies to our homelands. She claims to respect our independence, and yet she sends a New Republic fleet toward our territory. She claims to want a treaty between equals, and yet she seeks to weaken our position with espionage and threats. I do not know that any act is beyond her if she thinks it will help secure her power. I am gravely disappointed to learn that she falls so short of the ideals to which the New Republic aspires. At this very moment, I, my staff, and my crew are imprisoned within the planetary shield of Coruscant. We are being hounded by a battle cruiser of the Coruscant home fleet. We want nothing but to return to our homeworld. But Princess Leia stands in our way, denying us the freedoms to which she so glibly gives lip service. I asked the chairman of the Senate, and each member world represented there, to use whatever influence you can to persuade the princess to abandon her needlessly reckless and aggressive course. Open the shield. Allow us to go home."
The Senate erupted in angry voices and harsh words as Nilspar's face vanished from the displays.
"Turn it off,"
Leia said, and slumped into a chair.
"Turn it off,"
she repeated sharply when Aang and Akbar were slow to move. Aang finally complied, and the monitor dimmed to the color and brightness of the wall on which it hung. For a moment there was silence in the room. Akbar turned away to the viewpane, embarrassed for his friend.
"This is a disaster,"
he said simply.
"He's misinterpreted everything,"
Leia said disbelievingly.
"How could this have happened? We played right into their strongest fears. How could it have gone so wrong?" "Leia, we must do something," Aang pleaded with his eyes.
She nodded, and it seemed a great effort.
"Contact General Baintorf. Have him open the shield. Tell the Brilliant to break off. Let them go. Ask Benny if he'll appoint a representative of the Senate to arrange retrieval of the bodies." "Yes, Princess, right away."
Aang excused himself as though glad to escape.
"Flawlessly played," said Hiram Drayson.
He stood with crossed arms before the monitor, watching as Senator Paramus and Senator Hadidiji submitted articles of withdrawal for their respective worlds. 3 other small worlds, all represented in the Senate by their hereditary rulers, followed suit before Ben Kilnam succeeded in suspending the session. As the grids broke away from live coverage to analysis, Drayson called up a recording of Nilspar's address.
"Utterly flawless,"
he said after watching the replay, affirming his original judgment. There was more than a touch of admiration in his voice.
"But there's one missing piece, Viceroy,"
he added, stroking his face with one large hand, a thoughtful expression in his intent black eyes.
"What did it gain you? What's the payoff for weakening Leia's hand and stirring up the Senate? There's something not seen here."
Turning back to his desk, Drayson spun his computer toward him.
"Verify.
Verified. Jason, Hiram.
Call Eitan Abat. Scramble and blind route.
Calling Eitan Abat. Working. Waiting. Verifying.
Admiral Akbar.
The big calamari turned away from the viewpane to find the princess standing near the door.
Yes, Leia. Why was one of our ships anywhere near Koronach? Did you know anything about this?
I do not have any answers, Akbar said uncomfortably.
Try to find some for me,
she said, and turned away.
Where are you going?
Leia looked back over her shoulder.
Home. To think about resigning.
Leia,
don't try to argue with me, she said. Not now. Maybe tomorrow.
The Battle Operations Center of the fleet carrier Intrepid was deserted except for two generals carrying unhappy burdens. General Eitan Abat carried the burden of knowing what he had done, while General Han Solo carried the burden of knowing what must come. For more than 2 hours, Abat had been signaling Coruscant, attempting to speak directly with Princess Leia. All his attempts, using every direct and indirect route available to him, had failed. He had reached Fleet Operations, the Administrative Message Center, an apologetic First Administrator, an uncharacteristically taciturn Admiral Akbar, the President's Communications and Protocol Droid, and message boxes for half a dozen offices and their highly placed occupants. But Leia herself seemed to have disappeared from the command and communications structure of Imperial City, and no one Abat spoke to seemed overly eager to look for her. Finally, Akbar had agreed to carry a message for Abat to the President's residence, asking Leia to contact him on board the Intrepid. That was when the waiting began, an excruciatingly tedious exercise in clock-watching and uncomfortable silence. The sprawling BOC, which easily absorbed dozens of officers and ratings when staffed, seemed as claustrophobic as a cell in Intrepid's brig. When the hypercom finally lit up and squawked a red line alert, both men started. When the holodisplay brightened to show Leia from the shoulders up, Han was startled and dismayed by how pallid her face was, how dark and lifeless her eyes.
General Abat,
she said with a nod. Her voice was husky, and she cleared her throat after she spoke. Princess Leia, said Abat, thank you for responding to my request.
I understand from Admiral Akbar that you have some information for me.
Yes, Princess. He straightened his back and sat tall in his chair. I am the person responsible for the astrographic probes being sent into Farlax. Before the fifth sailed, I requested an updated survey of that sector, including Koronach cluster. I did this with the full knowledge that this was in violation of your orders. I offer no excuse and accept full responsibility for my actions. There was hardly a flicker of reaction on Leia's face.
Thank you, General. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. The next person to sit here will decide the rest.
Her eyes sought Han.
General Solo.
Yes, Leia, Han said, stepping forward.
I'm placing you in command in General Abat's stead. Your orders are to bring the Fifth Fleet back to Coruscant as soon as possible.
Leia, her pain shone momentarily through the mask of numbness.
Just come home, Han. Please.
The holodisplay went dark. Abat turned away from the hypercom. I'm sorry, he said, standing. You will need to recall the patrols before turning the formation. What? Sure. Now forget excuses and tell me why you did it. When Abat hesitated, Han added, That's an order. Very well, said Abat. I believed I had been denied the information I needed to do my job properly. Both parts of my job. Protecting my command and protecting the New Republic's interests. Princess Leia made a military decision for political reasons, and it left me in an untenable position. I attempted to make an end run around her objections by going outside the fleet to the Astrographic Survey Institute. You already know the results. I think I do. Do you? What do you mean? That flatfish was no spy ship. No. And it didn't blow itself up, did it? No. Then maybe it found what you wanted it to find. What you were worried is out here. Perhaps so, said Abbott. But it doesn't matter. The probe made no report, and there'll be no more probes sent into that area. Whatever secrets the Yavitha have, they'll keep. He saluted diffidently. Request permission to return to my quarters, sir. Han frowned. Granted, he said, and Abbott headed for the hatchway. General. Abbott paused and turned back. How many prowlers are assigned to the Fifth Fleet? 1 squadron. 8. There are also 2 squadrons of reconnaissance drones. Han gestured broadly at the bank of empty stations. You want to tell me which one of these buttons calls in your tactical staff? What are you saying? Abbott's face wore an uncertain expression. Well, we know someone or something out here is unfriendly to the New Republic, Han said grimly. Right? I'd say so. Seems as though we'd better do something to cover our withdrawal, then. That seem reasonable to you? You are in command of the fleet, General Solo. So I am, Han said. And I never turn my back to a dark corner when I know someone's after me. Which button? Abbott pointed. There.